Right, the next speaker is Brian Becker. He's managing our tool team, or tools group, and he's going to talk to you about MiServer version 3 and probably also show us some stuff, I think.
I hope so.
Good, excellent. Take it away.
Well, thank you. It's nice to be here. I've traveled 3,500 miles to come and have hamburgers, pulled pork, and southern fried chicken. So it's almost like home. Well, not right. Not quite. So anyhow, I'm going to talk a little bit about MiServer 3 today. And I want to talk about, well, why MiServer 3? What is it? How is it? When is it? And then we can get into some questions. So normally when I've done these talks in the past, I've started out with what is a web server. And when I was talking about this talk with Morton, he said, no, absolutely don't start with that, so we won't. And but I wanted to talk a little bit about where MiServer is in use today. TryAPL has been running MiServer for about almost 3 years now. And how many people registered for this conference? Uh-oh, anybody who's got their hands down, get it, take their names and send them a bill. But the registration system for the conference this year was written in MiServer. We also have it in the Dyalog file system, or file server administration console. If you've seen Morton do robot demos with his phone, that's hooked up to a MiServer running on the Diabot. And there are just a number of places that have been using MiServer version 2 for a while now. And today, though, I want to talk about MiServer version 3. Well, one of the main reasons to use it is because it's easy. It's easy to provide your users access to your application. All they need is a browser, and they can run from any operating system that has a browser, and I think that's most of them, if not all. It can run from any platform that has a browser. Again, I think that's all of them. So it doesn't matter whether you're running on a desktop, a laptop, a tablet, a phablet, a phone, a flaptop. There's got to be something else out there, right? A flapjack. You'll be able to run, provide your application on that platform. And the other thing is that you don't have any software to distribute, right? All you have to hope is that your users keep their browsers updated. But other than that, there's no software or updates to distribute, download, or install. And this means that your customers are always running the latest version of your software. It's also easy to build and deploy applications using MiServer. And one of the things that we introduced a concept last year is that we want to make it as easy to use MiServer and to build rich user experiences with MiServer as using QuadWC, the built-in Dyalog GUI control under Windows. And then MiServer will run on any platform where Dyalog, APL, and Conga can run. So as we move on to some of the other platforms like OS X, Android, or whatever, if Conga's running there, we can run MiServer. We already have it running on the Raspberry Pi. Morton's got a Pi sitting at his home. In Denmark, it's at 48.dk. Don't all go to it now. The Pi will burn up and their house will be a cinder when they get home. But so this means that you can run MiServer on Windows, Linux, AIX, and any of the other platforms that we're going to be distributing Dyalog and Conga on. So one of the things I wanted to see is how close are we now to being as easy as QuadWC. I want to issue a disclaimer first. I love QuadWC. So I'm not trying to say anything bad about QuadWC. I enjoy using it. It does a terrific job, and for a lot of applications, it's a terrific way to deliver a solution. But I want to try and give a mildly biased comparison of QuadWC to MiServer. So here we have a couple of applications. This one on the left is written using QuadWC, and this one on the right is MiServer. And they're very similar in terms of they have a couple of input fields for first and last name. They have a calendar control to select a date, and a submit button, or a click, a button to submit the form. So this is the code in QuadWC. Now I've removed, normally I comment my code, especially when I'm doing presentations. But I decided to take out all the comments out of both sets of code because I don't want to let the comments bias you. Just look at the code. So this is the code that makes that quad WC form. This is the code that makes the MiServer form. So if we take a look, they're about the same in terms of length, right? We've got code that makes the form in both cases, and we've got code that runs the callback when you press the submit button. In terms of controls, when you learn quad WC, you need to learn about certain control objects: form, label, edit, calendar, button, and so on. When you learn about MiServer, you're going to learn about control objects like H2, and these are HTML control objects or enhanced control objects. So you've got H2, form, and input grid, and edit field, and the button. So there's some analogy there. In terms of handling callbacks, on the button, the submit button, when we click that button, which is the select event, we are going to call a function called callMe, right? With MiServer, we assign on our button, on the click event, we're going to call callback function. So again, the analogy is very similar. In terms of the layout of controls, when you're using quad WC, you have to tell it where everything goes. So you're either going to specify it in terms of pixels or real pixels, stretched pixels, megapixels, or in terms of a percent of your screen size. And having laid out more than a few forms using quad WC, that can be a little tedious, especially if you want to move things around and have them still line up. You don't see any real formatting information here in the MiServer page because the browser, by default, renders things in a so things don't overlap. In terms of styling, with quad WC and quad WS, you're going to set properties like the foreground color, the background color, and so on. So in here, I'm going to set the background color of my form to whatever color that those three digits translate to. Anybody want to guess? No? No? With MiServer, you're going to use CSS, Cascading Style Sheet styling. So you're going to say that the body of my form is going to have a background color of cyan, which is what 124, 244, 255 is. In terms of available resources, with quad WC, quad WS, there are some third-party tools out there. As a matter of fact, with the object orientation that was overlaid on the GUI controls, you have access to all of the .NET controls and WPF for producing really rich user interfaces, and that's terrific. However, with MiServer, you have about a bazillion controls, and I'm rounding up to the nearest bazillion. But you can query for almost any kind of a control on the web, and you will find lots of them. Now, that's a good thing in some cases, and it's not such a good thing because how do you pick which one's the best? And that's part of what we're working on, is to try and select tools and controls that are going to do the job well and be easy to integrate into an APL environment. And then if you are looking for people to help you deliver an application using quad WC, if you look right and left here, you'll see a significant fraction of the people on Earth that can help you out with that process. However, in the MiServer world, there are lots of people out there that can help you in terms of styling web content, in terms of generating HTML content, and so on. So you've got access to more resources. In terms of platforms, well, with quad WC, quad WS, it's Windows running locally, or as Morton pointed out, when he reviewed my slides. Also, if you're running on a citrus farm. With MiServer, again, it's any platform with a web browser, so basically all of them. And if you still want to run locally, right, Morton talked about having an embedded HTML renderer built into the interpreter. So once you do that, you can generate content using MiServer that will run either on the internet or locally using the local rendering capability. Oh, demo time. Hey, I'm doing okay. Okay, so I've got a MiServer 3 working here, and I guess the first thing I want to show, so this is that same form that I showed earlier, and one of the things that we do with the template we provide with MiServer is that you can click on the icon in the upper left-hand corner and see the source code for the page. And is that large enough, or do I need to make, it needs to be larger? Okay. Better? Good enough? Please say yes. Okay. To toggle between the HTML content and the source code, you click on the icon in the upper left-hand corner. In this case, the Viking ship. And so this implements that entire form. We looked at the code a little bit ago, but it's pretty clean, pretty straightforward. It's not rocket science. It's barely computer science. Sorry. And then if we move on to something a little more sophisticated, and I'm going to have to shrink the screen for a second here. This is one of the Sync Fusion controls that's provided, which is called a tag cloud. And the idea behind a tag cloud is you've got some data that has relative frequency numbers. In this case, when I show you the code, so this is all the code that you need to. So the first thing I'm doing is, it turns out that the standard width of the Sync Fusion tag cloud is 350 pixels. So I get a tall tag cloud that runs off the bottom of the screen. So I just set the width. I set a style on my tag cloud element, so it has a width of 600 pixels. I'm adding a heading that says EJ tag cloud. I'm adding the tag cloud object itself. I'm saying that the containers inside, the container that the control is in, is called hashbar tag cloud, or hash tag cloud. And then I'm setting a couple of options, a title and a maximum font size. And then I'm just assigning some data to be the result of a fairly simple SQL query, which just shows that I have a database that we distribute with MiServer that has all of the zip codes in the United States. So this just joins the state name, joins on the state abbreviation between the states table and the zip codes table, and does a count of each zip code by state. And so that renders, when you load it, like so that the bigger states, or the states that have more zip codes, or I should say the states or other U.S. territories, because the Federated States of Micronesia is not a state yet. So the size of the text there is proportional to the number of zip codes it has compared to the other geographic areas. Next, here's another. So this is an accordion control. This is another control from Sync Fusion. And so I'm basically adding the accordion control to the page. I'm saying that its container is called hash accordion. I'm going to have two sections, and the title of the first section is first, the title of the second section is second, and then I've got the content for each of the sections. Now here I've just typed in a character constant. That could be other text that's generated by your page. It could be data that you're reading out of a file. It could come from almost anywhere, but for the purposes of the demonstration here, I've just got a simple hard-coded vector. And so the accordion looks like this. So you can click on it to display. And there are a number of options with all of the Sync Fusion controls. Plethora wouldn't be a sufficient word, to describe the number of options that Syncfusion gives you with each control. The default behavior off the shelf is generally pretty reasonable. But if you want to tailor, whether it has a plus and a minus versus a happy face and a sad face or whatever kind of icons, there are options to change any of that kind of stuff. The last page I want to show you is one I'm particularly proud of. Well, this was at about midnight last night. I had the clever idea to go out to the CIA World Fact database. And I downloaded some information about the population of countries in the world and the percent of the GDP, the gross domestic product for those countries, and the percent of GDP that's spent in those countries on healthcare. And now so I've got 3 dimensions of data that I'm plotting here, and the axes are, the vertical axis is the percent of GDP, so it goes anywhere from 0% up to almost 20. And then the bottom axis, which is off the screen, is US dollars. So it goes anywhere from about $3,100 to a little over 9,000. And then the diameter of the bubble is the relative population of that country. So does anybody want to guess who the statistical outlier is?
USA.
So if we hover over that button, we'll see that we can get some details about that particular bubble. So it is the United States. We spend about almost $9,400 per person in the U.S. every year. It's almost 18% of our gross domestic product, and we've got a population of 318 million and change. Who do you think all these reasonable countries down in this? So we've got, Germany, France, Norway, Austria, Australia, Sweden, Iceland, Ireland, Finland. So, okay, how about this one down here?
Singapore?
No. Monaco. And kind of in the middle here is Luxembourg, I think. Yeah. So it's an interesting way. So the Syncfusion controls give you a really nice way to visualize data. And so what's the code for this look like? Well, we're going to have to make it big again. You say Control Plus works, right? Okay, Control Plus. Oh, wow. You can teach an old Brian new tricks. Okay, so here we're adding a heading which is just says it's an EJ chart. The type is bubble chart. We're adding the chart itself. I don't have a laser pointer. Then we're setting some options for the axes, for the X and Y axes. Then down here we're setting some other options for the graph. The fact that you can resize it, we're setting to true. We're giving it a title. We're giving it a height. We're giving it that there's no visible legend. And then scrolling down a bit, this is the Syncfusion chart control can plot multiple series. So this data just represents one series that's being plotted. So my points is represented by this get CIA data that I pulled off the web last night. And then I'm saying that we want to set the animation to true, that the tooltips are going to be visible. You can specify the format for your tooltip. And the nice thing about this is all of these options are documented, not by us, because if we had to keep up with this documentation, we'd be forever behind. If Fionn was talking about having another 15 years, your children and your children's children will be documenting Syncfusion controls. But the Syncfusion documentation describes how all of these work, and it's very simple to go from the description that they give you to this representation. In fact, you can even cut and paste their options as text in your function. And then we have a function called script follows that will read that, parse it, and pass it off to the APL program. Okay. Oop. Demo time. So what is MiServer 3? It's a framework of tools that make the generation of web content easy from APL. So we can render HTML, we can use third-party widgets, and they can be from Syncfusion. When I did this talk last year, they had 25 controls. And then around Christmas, they had 40. And they keep adding it, damn them. They now have a complementary suite of controls, both for web and mobile platforms. And then we also support jQuery, jQuery UI, and jQuery Mobile, which are some very popular tool sets for doing web stuff. And then as we identify other widgets, or as preferably you identify other widgets and make us aware of them, we can implement those, interfaces to those as well. Now, when I talk about implementing interfaces, just about any jQuery-based control can be used by MiServer without doing anything. But what we try and do is we try and find out what are common use cases that we can phrase in a more comfortable or more natural APL manner. And then we put a wrapper on that control to make it easier to call from APL. But you still have ability to call it directly without the wrapper. The other thing is that we want MiServer to be an open source community project. So we're going to publish it on GitHub. MiServer 2 is currently out there, and MiServer 3 will be shortly. And we want you to participate in the effort, which means as you identify needs, as you build tools, please share them with us. Okay, the MiServer philosophy. Morton coined this phrase a while ago, and I've been touting it ever since, that anyone who can write an APL function should be able to host it on the web. So our goal is to provide a suite of tools to generate HTML and JavaScript that cover those common use cases. Again, we want to make it no more complex to deliver richer user interfaces than by using QuadWC. Now this thing EAWC is a class that we developed that basically implements that easy user interface, that QuadWC, as easy as QuadWC user interface. And as a matter of fact, that's what it stands for, easy as QuadWC. And I pronounce it Ewok. So any of you who are Star Wars fans will recognize that as an Ewok from the planet Endor. And and again, we want to provide the full interfaces to the full functionality of the underlying technologies. We want to make the framework easy to modify and extend, so that can be APL extensions or adding new third-party plugins, widgets, and libraries. So what do you need to know to run MiServer 3? Well, I used to say you needed to know some object-oriented programming in Dyalog APL, and Morton said that's not really true, and I realized he was right. Basically, you need to be able to type :class, and then some template name, and :access public. That is the extent of the object-oriented features of Dyalog APL that you need to know to write a MiServer page. It's helpful to have a basic understanding of web pages. It helps to understand a bit of HTML so you know what the elements are. Similar to the elements you need to learn in QuadWC, you need to learn a little bit of HTML. As you do, we provide some style sheets with MiServer 3, but if you want to change the styling, change the look and feel, you're going to need to know a little bit of CSS to do that. And we're trying to make it possible so you need to know little to no JavaScript. Now again, the disclaimer is, as the sophistication of your application increases, the need to know for these other technologies probably goes up. Well, instead of giving MiServer a rest, I'd like to give Brian a rest. But what I really want to do is give MiServer a RESTful web interface. And REST stands for Representational State Transfer, and it's gained widespread acceptance as a simpler alternative to SOAP-based web services. We have the SAWS tool that we've had for a number of years to implement SOAP-based web services. And it turns out that companies like Facebook, Google, Twitter, the US government, and a whole bunch of people are implementing RESTful web interfaces to their applications. And it uses standard HTTP commands and returns standard MIME types. So you would use the commands get, post, put, and delete to retrieve, update, replace, or delete a resource. So here is a so this is a REST web service that the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration in the US has implemented. And I basically just said, I gave it my zip code, and I said, what's the weather for the next day look like? And you can see that I live at latitude 43.04, longitude negative 77.69. That today's maximum temperature is going to be 71, the minimum temperature is going to be 49, and there's about a 7% probability of precipitation. And this data you can grab very easily. It's just a simple GET request to a web address. The same thing with, here's Google APIs. So I asked her if you can read up here, right? I'm just asking for, the center is Eastbourne, UK, the size is 600 by 300, and the zoom is 15. And so I queried the Google Static Maps API using REST to grab a map on the fly of our location here. Okay. So RESTful Web Service, we're running out of time, so I'm just going to, you can read this and the slides will be available. But I was going to demonstrate a CD database application based on JD's CD database, and then when I was going to show the delete entire collection command, I was going to watch for JD's response. But basically, you can choose to implement whatever subset of these commands you care to. So if you don't want your user to be able to delete the entire collection, you can disable that command. And you can, it's very simple to build RESTful web services using MiServer. So when? Well, the conference version is available now. We'll have it out on GitHub in November. Fiona and I are going to be joined at the hip for some number of days or weeks, and we'll have full documentation first quarter next year. And then we'll be adding additional widgets and content ongoing, and particularly as you identify things and tell us that you need them. Questions?
Would it be possible to get Nick's editor when I click on the Viking ship instead? Then you have an awesome development environment where I can go from web page to editing the web page in one go.
There's no reason we couldn't do something like that. Actually, Morton had implemented a debugging interface to MiServer that allows you to bring up the page, modify the file, save it, and then rerun it. So, and that's wrapped in with MiServer. Charles?
I may have missed a concept. You said that Morton or you or somebody is thinking of coming up with a way of interfacing to your own computer locally.
Yes.
But why not just use your own local browser? Why do you need some special HTML5 emulator to do that?
Well, one, if you've got the HTML5 emulator, you don't have to worry about having a browser. Secondly, you're not using a local network port, and it's just a way that it's more integrated into the APL session.
So no reason, really?
Yeah. Well, Morton probably has a good...
On a tablet, you might not be... When you're running on tablets or phones, you might not have the ability to create a network connection inside the machine.
Yeah, that's true.
For a beginner like me, you said the documentation is coming out pretty late. Where would I start to get a feel and play with this? You know, and I need a hold stuff in my hand or read or
Right. The best way is generally the way most of us find out about new technologies, which is we find a running example and we start kicking it, right, and playing with it. And MiServer comes with a bunch of running pages that you can, see what's going on, change something, see what happens when you change it. And Ray, you've got my phone number. Anyone else? Thank you very much.